Let me see if we've got Ryan Jespersen now.
Can you hear me?
Holy cow, yeah, we can.
It's nice to hear your voice.
Nice to hear your voice, too. I was just going through, just reminding people of where the party standings were, because I was a little bit surprised to see that the Liberals don't have a full slate. And yet, they, got the Alberta Independence Party, which never even really existed up until a few months ago. That has 63 candidates that they're potentially running. So I'm a bit surprised that some of the mainstream parties didn't go through more effort to try to get a full slate.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I gotta be. I'm trying to decide right now, very quickly in my mind. It looks like a beautiful mind right now. Inside my brain, we're trying to decide whether or not I want to go there in commentary on the Alberta Liberals, because I'm trying to be as fair as I can.
Do you know why though? It goes to the issue of apathy. I had somebody say, I like that David Kahn. I heard him speak. I'd like to vote for him.
Debate.
But then they went to look up, and he's not running a candidate in their riding. So why would that person now go out and vote when they know that the person that they want to elect doesn't have a showing in their area?
Because that's always such a big thing, isn't it? I mean, the Alberta Independence Party. What about even the Alberta Party? Stephen Mandel, their big thing was they will run 87 candidates. That's a big thing, because it says something, doesn't it?
It does. If you have the ability to field a full slate of candidates, what it says is that you're not just a Calgary party, not just a rural party, or not just an Edmonton party. If you can run a full slate of candidates, it means that you've found good people who believe in your principles across the entire province. So to me, that makes you real. So I look at the three parties as being real: the Alberta Party, the NDP, and of course the UCP.
Danielle, we're going to be talking voter apathy for the better part of this simulcast. Very much looking forward to it. We'll get into some of the statistics and maybe some speculation as to why we think that some provincial elections in Alberta have seen, relatively decent voter turnout and others just haven't. But we also have an opportunity to check in with Andrew Ng, who's the Vote Project Coordinator for Apathy is Boring. Let's bring Andrew into the conversation. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Danielle, take the lead on this one.
Yeah, Andrew, I want to ask about that. Like, I took economics in school, and we had this one segment where we talked about rational apathy. That there's a reason why some people just feel, you know what, pox in all their houses. I don't like any of them, so I'm not going to go out and vote. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the reasons why people choose not to vote?
Yeah, so we focus a lot on young people, so apathetic youth, which is a myth, really, because we get this whole idea, the stereotype that youth don't care about things, they're apathetic, they're kind of self-centered and lazy, right? So our organization counters that idea. And the stats are out there showing it, right? So young people are more likely to discuss politics, whether it's face-to-face over the phone. They're more likely to participate in protests and stuff, but they just don't vote, which is strange, right? And in talking to young people that in person around Calgary and Edmonton, there's a lot of cynicism. Has to do with distrust in politicians. The old classic line that politicians will say whatever they can to get elected, and then when they get into power, they don't do what they've promised. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of belief that the voting system doesn't work. Especially in a place like Alberta, where a lot of people felt like their votes didn't mean anything because it was a one-party rule for most of their lives. Well, basically their entire lives, for young people anyway. And and they think that the way the votes go aren't fair, right? So you have a party gaining all the power with maybe like 40% of the votes, whereas the rest of the 60 are almost completely unheard.
So, in other words, Andrew, you're hinting that you think that electoral reform may lead to stronger turnout at the polls? Do you think it's that simple, that we could restore people's faith in the process?
Personally, I think so. It seems like it makes sense. There's a lot of things something that I've heard a lot of people say, that it's just their votes don't matter.
But isn't it interesting that in the places where they keep on trying to do electoral reform, and I look across the mountains at BC, every single time a proposal comes forward, it gets voted down. And I think Justin Trudeau, frankly, did probably the worst job of trying to sell electoral reform, because it was the same old cynicism. Well, if I can't get the kind of system that would benefit me, then we're just going to ditch it altogether. It's really difficult when politicians have gotten elected under first past the post for them to go through and then want to change it.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's, I think, confusing to people, right? To have this idea that we're going to vote, but then you're going to vote for two people or three people, and then it's not just pick the one person anymore, or not just pick the party. And a lot of that, like not voting is also an access to understanding how voting works and the ability to do it. So if there's a possibility that it's going to be even more complicated, I mean, who knows if that's the case. And maybe that scares a lot of people into doing voter reform.
I'm curious to know how you would perceive, Andrew, the breakdown to happen or where it happens, because I mean, when you talk about, and it's always difficult to sort of characterize an entire generation, but you say that with the younger voters or younger potential voters, that maybe there's a certain cynicism. They're aware of issues. They care about issues, but they whatever the reason, wherever that breakdown occurs, it does, and they don't actually turn out to cast their ballot. This is typically, people characterize young people as having that optimism, that unbridled enthusiasm, the belief that they can change the world. Why doesn't that apply here in one of the most important avenues?
I know, it's weird, and I just wrote about this. Like, we send out our newsletter every week, and I wrote about this, that young people have always said it, been the trendsetters and change makers, but they're not doing it politically, which kind of, and I think it's because they don't, like I said, they don't believe in it. And then I said, I kind of posed the question of, how do we know things won't change unless we try, right? And so one of our big messages this year was like, in the 2015 election, only one out of four young people between 18 and 30 voted. And I think if more people knew that, that it might spur them to think, like, well, me, along with all these other people, said the same thing, that voting doesn't matter.
Do you have the stats for the other generations? I've always thought of apathy as being an everybody problem. I always think the kids get a bit of a bad rap when it's actually everybody is tuning out during election campaigns.
Yeah, overall, yes. Like, turnout in the last election was around 60%, which is, I think everybody would agree that more would be nicer, but it's particularly low among young people. If you compare, it's hard to compare the actual numbers because we don't have raw data on that. But we've looked at, other groups have looked at the proportion of young people in the province versus the number of young people who actually voted. So let's say it was we make up roughly around 12% of the population, but only 7% of the total amount of people who voted. Whereas older people were maybe around the same 20-something% of the population, but their voter numbers are way higher, something like 25%. So they're overrepresented in that sense.
Danielle, I've got and Andrew, for that matter, I've got a great text here. Maybe it's intuitive. It says it's a consistent trend to write this off as apathy, but every first world nation has low turnout. Economies are stable. Third world democracies may have higher turnout because of their economic instability. Maybe instability brings people to polls. Their lives depend on it. Higher turnout also is generally a result of a more polarized electorate. I took a look way back to the highest voter turnout in the province of Alberta's history, just under 82%, 81.8%. Back on August 22nd, 1935, when William Aberhart's Social Credit League swept to power, Bible Bill, mixing politics and religion, grabbing 56 of 63 seats, sending the UFA packing. There was a lot behind that. But maybe there's something to what that listener's saying. Maybe when a province or any jurisdiction is experiencing instability that it's not accustomed to, it'll prompt more people to turn out and vote. Danielle, I'm curious for your opinion. Would this qualify? Does April 16th qualify under those definitions?
I don't know that it does. I would expect that we'd get the same amount of turnout because I think what we're seeing is that people are getting turned off by the dirty politics, and they're saying, fine, I just want to opt out. I just want it to be over and let me know how it turns out. I would say as well, though, there's something cultural about voting. I remember, because we've got so many Saskatchewan friends, Saskatchewan has consistently high voter turnout, and I'm not sure all of the reasons why that is, but you can create a culture where this is a public duty and it's important. So that would be another factor that I don't think that we have that same imperative to vote in Alberta that they do in other places.
Andrew, before we thank you for your time, what's your take on what you just heard?
I would think that, going by trends, just for in 2015, we had higher turnout in both Alberta and the federal election. Both of times were higher, especially among young people. I feel like maybe it's when they see that things can change and there's like feelings of change, people will come out and be part of it.
Andrew, we really appreciate your insight on this. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Andrew Ng is the vote project coordinator for Apathy is Boring. You can learn more about what they're doing at apathyisboring.com. It's Ryan Jespersen and Danielle Smith with you on Chorus Radio province-wide talking voter apathy, part of our Decision Alberta coverage.
It's Danielle Smith and Ryan Jespersen in our province-wide coverage on Chorus Radio for our Decision Alberta. And we're just talking about voter apathy. So are you guys going to vote? Do you feel like you're more motivated or less motivated to vote this time around? Ryan, I've got a few comments that have come in. Mike says, Saskatchewan has high voter turnout to keep out the NDP. And another person along the same line says, I always said that apathy is going to be a major issue for the NDP. They don't have a lot of ground game, especially in Calgary. Voter turnout will be the key. But UCP voters are very motivated to get off their couch and vote. It goes to that issue that Andrew was talking about. If you think you need to get out there to make a change, you're more likely to vote than if you're voting for the status quo.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, I like this one from Fake Ezzy. Danielle, we actually had a really interesting development before you and I joined forces, so to speak, here in this 10 to 11 hour. A listener out of nowhere, somewhat unprompted, from Whitecourt, texted in and said he was appalled. He says his son just turned 19. Son lives with the mom, so dad says he doesn't live with me, but I was talking to him and I was appalled. I asked him if he planned on voting, and he didn't even know. He asked if it was a Whitecourt municipal election, had no idea what's going on. And Buddy's writing in saying, like, whose job is it to make sure that the up-and-comers, these young adults, are informed? And I've got literally hundreds of messages on this. It's great. I love this one from Fake Ezzy, who says a great way to teach your kids about the election process is to have them all work at the polls. He says, my wife and all four of us have worked at either a provincial or federal election. You can be a poll clerk, an information officer, even an enumerator at the age of 16.
What somebody along the same lines is asking, is pointing that out with their own family. Says the apathy runs deep with the young. I'm 63, have 3 kids that are good citizens and in our city, and I'm peeved, can't say that word on the air, at the system and apathetic, and telling them that they have to change the system. But because any party that has the power of the party whip tells me we've got no democracy. We only have election day. Then the elected dictator gets to dictate all others till the next election. You know what I wonder, Ryan, is if the real issue is about technology, the way to get kids is to get them on social media. And I know that in Australia, they have a program where you can actually go online onto an app and look at who your candidates are and search them. I don't know if they've managed to get it to the next level where you can actually even vote for the candidate from your smartphone. But I think until we make it easier for people to look up their candidates and vote, we're going to end up with that continual problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we do need to find ways to make it easier, but we talked about people that would potentially lose faith in the process, and a big part of that could be if the integrity of it was ever compromised. In other words, if it was ever hacked, if that ever happened. I mean, we have banking software. We have software where people are trading stocks, so I don't understand why we couldn't make that happen, and I'd be surprised if we don't see really serious changes to how people vote in the next, 5-10 years. Let's say 2 more election cycles.
I think we're going to have to. Hey, look, we've got to take a pause. We'll get back and we'll take some calls. 403-974-8255 if you want to call in. Do you want to say your number too, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. 780-496-0063.
It's Ryan Jespersen and Danielle Smith. We'll be back for our Decision Alberta coverage on Chorus Radio. Stay with us.
You're listening to Decision Alberta coverage. Continuing today, a province-wide conversation on 770 CHQR with Danielle Smith. This is Ryan Jespersen out of 630 Ched in Edmonton. Today, we're teeing up 8 days away from the election, voter apathy. Danielle, what does it look like on your text line? What are people saying?
Well, they've got some good ideas about how to fix it. I've got Richard saying, I'm from New Zealand where voter turnout is almost always higher than 80%. The highest I saw was 94%. But elections are always on the weekend, usually a Sunday. It seems bizarre to have it on a weekday when such a high proportion of people are at work with only a 2-hour window available in the evening for most people. Well, that's smart. Another person says that in Australia, it's mandatory. Another person says if you want to get people to vote, give them a tax credit for voting. So I've got a few people who have some suggestions about how you might get that number up.
Well, what percentage? I'm going to say right now about 5 to 10% of my texts-ish are saying that voting should be mandatory. Alan, as a matter of fact, who's watching this streaming live on our Facebook page, says, I vote because for me, it's basically a commandment. He says voting should be mandatory in Canada and none of the above should be listed on the ballot.
Well, I think if you had none of the above listed on the ballot, that might win in a couple of ridings this time around. But then, I guess the way it would work is if that was the case, then you'd essentially have to clear the slate, get a bunch of new candidates, and run the election again in a by-election. It would certainly send a message to politicians. I've got another person saying that saying voter apathy is not laziness is complete BS. So they think it is utter laziness. Write-in candidates on spoiled ballots, that's a valid expression of voter disappointment, but it takes some effort. So they're saying if you don't like any of your options, at least go in and spoil your ballot. Run a line through or vote for all of them or vote for none of them, and it'll at least be counted and you'll have done your duty.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't record declined ballots in Alberta until the 1993 general election, which, by the way, saw one of the highest voter turnouts. It was one of those that got into the 60% range when Ralph Klein took on Lawrence Decore, a great sort of a standoff between the former mayors of Calgary and Edmonton. But if you take a look at 2015, our last provincial election, just under 1.5 million valid ballots, 1.495 million ballots cast, 5,000 and change rejected, 2,000 and change declined.
Oh, that's much lower than I would have expected. I would have thought there'd be more spoiled ballots. I guess if you're going to go through the effort of getting there, you probably are already committed.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting, too? We may have a difference this time around because we've got the advance polls all this week. And it's a different approach, too, because you could vote in any of the, I think there's 263 or something like that, advance polls. And so they're making it as easy as possible. So that would be one thing. I've got a person here saying my 19-year-old son and I are going to the advance polls together. I vote for everything. That's what he votes in every election is what he's saying, and that's what he grew up with. His first official vote was for the Olympic bid, so that's one thing. And then another person here saying my daughter in grade 6 is studying the election. It's been very difficult to find information on the candidates in our area. She even said, no wonder people don't vote. So that's a grade 6er saying, hey, I can't find anything on that Green Party candidate. Darn it, no wonder people don't want to come out and vote if it makes it this difficult.
Yeah, no kidding. That's kind of funny and disheartening at the same time, isn't it?
Well, you know what I should say, though? Anybody who's looking maybe for this mom, maybe what you should do is go to daveberta.ca. Yeah. Dave Cornwallier is one of the most popular bloggers, and he does a tremendous job in every election identifying who all the candidates are, drawing links to their website if they have one, or social media links. So I would suggest that if you're looking for who to vote for in your area.
Yeah, I always like hearing what's happening with the youth. I mean, sometimes when we say, I shouldn't say this, Danielle, it's going to come back to bite me, but we can't teach old dogs new tricks, and I'm one of those old dogs. For me, it was hardwired in how important it was to vote. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you treat it like paying your taxes. But, for a lot of people, like Elena that's listening in, she says, I was raised as well. It's your duty to vote. It's something you're expected to do as an adult. She says, I'm proud I've never missed an election. Says her daughter's elementary school has an election coming up on the day of the actual one. They've learned about all the candidates. They went on a field trip to the legislature to learn more about government. She says, I think it's important that schools start early, but also important to teach your kids at home. Elena says, but as parents, we really try to be respectful of which party our child likes or chooses, regardless if it's not the same as you. That would be amazing, right? A couple of left-leaners, their kid's going to vote UCP in the class election, or vice versa.
They got to bite their tongue.
A couple of right-wingers, and their kid's going to try to keep the NDP, and, that could be. We were joking earlier this morning. I love walking past houses that have lawn signs for competing political parties in the same house.
Yeah, mom and dad are fighting there. Maybe it's even the young kids who are saying, no, you can't just have that lawn sign up. You got to put another one up. My dad always used to say that if you don't vote, then you don't have the right to complain for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
And so that's been ingrained in me too. I've got a bunch of calls lined up.
Let's get to some.
I've got Donna, David, Chris, Steve, and Jenna. I don't know if we'll get to all of you, but hang on. We'll go to Donna first in Three Hills. Donna, go ahead. What's your thought today?
I just think that one of the reasons people don't vote is because there's so much lying and smearing and garbage being said and printed that people just don't know who to vote for. They don't know who to trust. And some people aren't good at research, and I think that's why they don't vote.
Donna, I think you might be right. Are you going to vote this time?
Oh, definitely.
All right. I won't put you on the spot and ask you for who. Oh, I think she's given us an idea of where she's going to go. Do you have any calls on your end?
Well, hang on. Is she still on the line?
Yeah, let me see if she is. You still there, Donna?
Yes.
Donna, can I be totally rude and ask you to elaborate? I know this is against everything I stand for, asking people how they're going to vote on the air, but you said not for Rachel, but that could mean any number of things.
It could.
I like her answer.
She's
there you
not
go,
gonna be
Donna.
pinned down on it.
Hey, she's keeping it classy. My parents right now, if they're listening live, they're appalled that I even thought to ask her that. Danielle on the text line, though, listener says the exact same thing. When you consider the fact that politics attracts the worst and corrupts the best, a little apathy should not come as a surprise.
Do you know what's interesting, though? I mean, I've never been afraid of saying who I'm voting for. Maybe it's because I've always been in a position where I can be public about it. And when I was on the editorial board at the Herald, we kind of had to say who we were voting for. We used to endorse each time. And so it's interesting to me, and I wonder if this is a growing feature, that as politics gets more polarized, people are less inclined to stick their neck out and say who they're voting for, because they don't want to feel like they have to defend all of the negative coverage that they're hearing out there and all the smears. They just want to be able to vote what their own conscience is without having to wear it.
I ran into a candidate for the Alberta Party over the weekend at a Oilers event. We were doing that Battle of Alberta. Now that we have an Alberta-wide audience, let's steer clear of talking hockey, because it's not going to go well for everybody in Northern Alberta.
I support both the Oilers and the Flames.
I bet you do.
I hope you're cheering for the Flames as we're carrying on, and you guys aren't.
Born and raised in Calgary.
Excellent. Okay.
So this candidate in Morinville, St. Albert said and he's a candidate for the Alberta Party, Neil Kortash, said one of the interesting things he's hearing on the doors, and his biggest challenge right now in trying to get his lawn signs out, is he says people are concerned about the vote splitting element here. But get this, he says he's hearing it from both sides. And that's why I was curious about our last caller, because Neil says people are concerned the Alberta Party is going to steal votes from the NDP. They're also going to steal votes from the United Conservatives, which puts them in an interesting position.
It's true. And Freedom Conservative, I think, will steal some votes away from the Conservatives in the rural ridings. But Filderbrand is not wanting to try to create a vote split in Edmonton or Calgary. And so I think that Alberta Party factor, it's unclear to me. I've always thought that because Mandel is a little bit more on the progressive side, I always thought he drew more from the NDP, but you might be right. He might be drawing from the Conservatives. I do have some other calls here. I've got David on the line. David, go ahead. What's your thought today?
I've gotten so disgusted and fed up, and I want to reserve the right to bellyache about politicians. I go to the ballot box, and I spoil my ballot. And because it's my ballot, I can do whatever I want with it, and it still counts.
And you feel that way through every election? How long have you been doing that for?
Well, the last one, it kind of hit close to home, because when Mr. Prentice said if Albertans want somebody to blame, they should look in the mirror. I'm struggling to keep a roof over my head. I live in a mobile home park. I'm paying $2,000 a month to live in a trailer park, and nobody gives a crap.
David, thanks for sharing that. And I think a lot of people feel that way, that if you don't have a politician that speaks to you and seems to understand where you're coming from, you're going to do what David did. And
Can we acknowledge, though, and I get this, when a politician says something, people take it so personally, right? Like look in the mirror, or sewer rats, embarrassing cousins, all these things. People, they're saying it about me personally. I live in a mobile home park. I'm paying $2,000 a month, and they're telling me to look in the mirror. However, would Jim Prentice, probably have taken the comment back? Yeah. Was he wrong? Nope.
I think where he was wrong is that I think a lot of people who voted Conservative said, yeah, we voted for you to take care of this stuff.
Yeah.
We voted for the legacy of Peter Lawhude, who was always running balanced budgets, and Ralph Klein, who always ran balanced budgets too. I think that people felt like it was the PCs who led off track from what it is that they were giving direction for. So asking people to take blame for the fact that the politicians had mismanaged things for the last 10 years, that's what I think people were reacting to.
Got an interesting message here from Tiny Tim out in Drayton Valley. Boy, if you want to have a conversation about whether or not people, when it comes to voter turnout and whether a none of the above option, how that might play, Drayton Valley could be an interesting conversation to have. But Tiny Tim says perhaps the young people are figuring out their future is one of servicing insurmountable debt. He says that'll dampen your enthusiasm every time. A couple of comments I have on Tiny Tim's statement. Number one, if that's the case, why would you not want to do something about it? And number two, I'm not sure that it's fair, let alone accurate, to be talking about young people all the time in the context of voter apathy.
And I don't know that young people yet have made that connection. They will. I mean, they're the ones who are going to end up paying the higher taxes to support all the debt today. I don't know that they've made that connection yet. I think young kids are thinking, how am I going to get through university with the student loan debt? How am I going to be able to afford a house when I get out of school? How am I going to be able to afford to have kids? And so those are the kind of things that they're voting on, which actually is voting for more government spending as opposed to looking at the other aspect of it. I'm kind of curious to know, are you getting anyone from Drayton Valley telling you that they've now decided not to vote for Mark Smith because of the last week?
This is, I'll give credit to Elise Stolte, who has a great piece that's running in Post Media. She discusses a number of the sort of like spin-offs of Mark Smith's past comments, and she drove out there and talked to people. I lament the fact, Danielle, that we were out there live. We did a town hall style, a great broadcast. Drayton Valley and Devon residents packed the house, 150 people in our live studio audience, and then this story broke like 3 days later. 3 days later. But Elise talked to a bunch of folks out there, and the sense I get from her piece is people are going to plug their noses and vote UCP. I think it's going to be one of the biggest landslides in the province, vote-wise, even considering what's going on, which we could draw our own conclusions about that. Danielle's number, 403-974-8255. Mine is 780-496-0063. We're back in a minute.
Danielle Smith here with Ryan Jespersen for our province-wide coverage for Decision Alberta on Chorus Radio. 403-974-8255 is the number to call here. 780-496-0063, the number to call in Edmonton. I've got a few comments that have come in. One person here saying, yep, no lawn sign for us. It's more important to stay friendly with my communist neighbors. Alan says, in countries where people understand the value of the vote, they line up for hours, even when getting shot at. I'd say that schools and adults need to teach its values. Another good comment.
Great comment.
Here's another person, though, who goes the other way, saying, is apathy really a concern? The thing that scares me most is that there seems to be too much ignorance in the electorate. And if you're too lazy to be fully educated, stay home, please.
I love that, and I don't love it. You know what I mean? Like, I was talking to, it doesn't matter that it was a funeral, but I was at a funeral over the weekend, and politics comes up at the wake part, of course, and some of the comments I was hearing, and in different directions, different political leanings, I'm just going, I can't believe that these guys are going to be voting. Like, I just, and I don't mean any disrespect by that, but some of the comments they're making about, like unable to even differentiate between federal and provincial politics. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and I wonder if you did have mandatory voting, which I could be persuaded about it, I suppose, but I'm not really in favor of mandatory voting. But if we did, it might encourage more people to get educated just because they would have to know who to vote for. But it's very easy, in my opinion, to find out what the different party platforms are. Would be very easy to find parties that align with you. But some people just make their decisions on gut, on instinct, on the basis of character, on the basis of who they like better, or who gives and so people make their decisions on a variety of different reasons, sort of bringing in all of the different influences and things that they've heard, and it comes up with one answer. So I don't know if you can be very methodical about it sometimes.
Yeah, we've got full call banks. Let's get to these. Diane has been holding the line. Diane, what prompted you to reach out to us, and what do you want everyone to hear?
Well, I was a couple of different topics that you guys have brought up. I know that you brought up the fact that the schools are supporting teaching this.
I feel like we're losing the call, which is unfortunate, Diane. You're cutting in and out. Maybe, we'll go to another call. My apologies. Ruby's next in line. Ruby, what was it that prompted you to reach out?
You just mentioned Prentice. And what he said that pretty much put the nail in his coffin. Oh, that's not a very fortunate.
No worries.
Words. But I saw that broadcast when he said that, and he did not say, you need to look in the mirror. What he said was, we all need to look in the mirror. He was including the whole government and the public. And yet the media put their spin on it and omitted those first two words, we all. And that's the way it has been spun ever since, and I find it's totally unfair to Prentice and what his intention was.
Ruby, I appreciate the call, and thanks for clarifying. Danielle, you must have a ton of calls ready to go.
Yeah, I do. I was just going to say that I think what happened was the hashtag, it was the media world, the social media world. The hashtag Prentice blames Alberta got going, and I think that kind of said how people thought about it. We got Chris on the line. Chris, go ahead. Your thought today.
Hi, I think one of the things that we could do to really help with voter apathy actually would be recall legislation. The challenge that we have is that we elect people into office, and in 4 years, well, for the next 4 years, it's very hard to even get in touch with them, let alone hold them accountable to their campaign promises. I'll give you an example. I've been trying to get a hold of MP Sohi for the last 20 weeks. So I phone once a week, and I always get told, oh, you'll get a call back. Oh, we know you've been trying to get a hold of them. I haven't heard squat in the last 20 weeks. So, it's kind of frustrating. If we had recall legislation, I think we'd have a better chance of actually having accountable government, which would mean more people are involved in the government, more people want to try and steer the ship, and we'd have better dialogue and better conversation. For the last 2 months before the election, everybody gears up, everyone grabs their signs, we're kind of like, grab your torch and pitchforks, and away we go. But the challenge is, why aren't we like this for the whole 4 years while they're in office? Why aren't we having creative dialogue? And I think the more dialogue we have, the more people are going to vote, the less apathy we're going to have.
Chris,
but we need to have government that can actually get back.
Great, thank you for that. And I support recall legislation, but only in the event that somebody does something egregious, because I have to tell you, if you've got 100,000 constituents, it might be a bit unrealistic to think that an MP can personally respond to every email and phone call. I know people have that expectation, but that's pretty tough to do, having been on that side. All
right, Danielle, Diane has found more bars of reception for her phone. We want to give her a second shot at this. Diane, you've got the floor.
Hi. So what I'm bringing up is the fact that the schools are actually teaching now about the fact that they're able to go and vote, and Warburg's actually voting as well alongside of the election, which I think is amazing because my son's in grade 9 and they're doing it. But the other thing is the Alberta Party has really brought on a platform and the other thing is there's a lack of education, a massive lack of education. I know for a fact that there is no Alberta Party signs out where we live. There's nothing, and if they are, they've been taken down, I noticed. The other thing is that they're there for the scientific world. There's lots of really, really well-known people on that party, and I think that that's where, if people knew about the platform of the Alberta Party, they wouldn't be so diversified and feeling that their votes are being split. Everyone's panicking because they don't like the fact their votes are being split.
All right, Diane, I really appreciate that call. The leaders' debate, Danielle, was obviously a big opportunity for Stephen Mandel and David Kahn to get their platforms out there and remind Albertans that this is not necessarily, by definition, a two-horse race. Do you believe that either of those leaders did as well as they needed to do on Thursday evening?
Probably to win their own seats, and maybe here in Calgary for the Alberta Party to potentially take the seats that they have with Greg Clark and with Rick Fraser. Beyond that, I'm not so sure. And and this is part of the issue, is if you don't have proportional representation, if you only get 3 or 4 or 5% of the vote, you're just not going to get enough seats.
Yeah, and I just, my impression after watching the leaders' debate in its entirety was that nobody won, and in a situation where one leader in particular, Jason Kenney, is polling high, his job, we had Erica Barutz the next morning here in studio, the president of the United Conservative Party. She says his job was to not lose.
Yeah, and he didn't lose. I think that's part of the reason why, I guess by default, he won. We got Steve on the line. Steve, your thought today?
What's the best tank mix using Group 2 herbicide on broadleaf weeds, or better yet, the best goose load for a 3H modified choke pump? You know who can answer that? A farmer. And here's the thing. The NDP and the Liberals not only don't know how to speak farm, they don't want to. I was at a meeting where a guy in his 70s, a farmer, asked about Indian reserves and the pipeline, and he was corrected. Oh, we don't use the word Indian anymore. And the bottom line is farmers don't sit around in coffee houses debating the finer use of the proper pronouns we use, because they're too busy providing us with a food supply. And my message to the NDP and Liberals, if you're so offended by how farmers use pronouns, here's a thought. There's a reason you don't get their vote, and maybe you shouldn't be allowed to eat what they produce.
Steve, thanks for
that is a hell of a call for 100 different reasons.
Steve is one of my regulars, but I think that's part of it, is that our rural friends feel like you're just jumping all over them for not expressing themselves the right way, when what they're trying to do is figure out in the way. I mean, we've had all kinds of change in the language, and they're a little bit slower to pick it up, but then they feel like they're jumped all over when they're trying to get their point across.
Yeah, I mean, that's Pandora's box. We don't have time to get into it. Darren's been holding the line. Darren, what's on your mind? What prompted your call? You got the floor, Darren. Hi.
Well, this morning you guys are talking again about Martin Smith. I've grown up in Drayton Valley my whole life, and I've known Mark since he came to town. And those comments are taken out of context. And if you know Mark, that's not the way Mark is. That's not the way Mark thinks. Mark is very inclusive. He loves everybody, and he fights for everybody. And it saddens me that this is just going on and on and on. And that's just not who he is.
All right, Darren, well, I appreciate the call, and you're more than welcome to come to the defense of Mark. I think his work speak for themselves. And Danielle, we have 15 seconds left.
And I think that's probably why he's going to end up winning in Drayton Valley. The question is whether it's going to impact votes in Calgary and Edmonton.
I don't think it has anything to do with who he is. Someone said the other day you could run a fence post in Drayton Valley and it would win for the Conservatives, and I think that's probably the case.
No kidding. All right, we'll do this again next week. Ryan Jespersen, Danielle Smith. This has been province-wide Decision Alberta coverage on Chorus Radio.